All right, today we are getting deep into the heart of your car's drivetrain. We're going to talk about something that's absolutely critical, but honestly, not a lot of people really understand it. It's called differential bearing preload. Think of it as this hidden tension that's working behind the scenes to keep everything running just right.
So, you've probably been there, right? You're driving along and you start to hear this meow sound. It's a weird whining noise, maybe a low rumble, and you notice it's perfectly in sync with your speed. The faster you go, the louder it gets. It's a super common symptom, and it usually points to a problem in one very specific, very important place.
Yep, the source of that annoying whine is usually buried deep inside your vehicle's differential. And it's almost always related to the bearings and a very precise hidden force that's supposed to be holding them perfectly steady. When that force isn't right, well, that's when things start to get noisy, and your ears are the first to let you know.
So, what is this hidden force? It's called bearing preload, but what does that even mean? Let's break down the science of this applied tension and figure out why it is so important for a happy, healthy differential.
Okay, putting it simply, bearing preload is just a specific amount of load or pressure that's applied to the bearings when everything is put together. Its only job, is to completely eliminate any internal clearance. You're basically squeezing out every tiny bit of wiggle room to make the whole assembly rock solid from the get-go.
And this really shows you why that matters. On the left, you've got an unloaded bearing. See, it has this natural, tiny bit of slack inside. Now, that might not seem like a big deal, but under the massive forces inside a differential, that little bit of slack turns into destructive vibration. But on the right, with a preloaded bearing, all that slack is gone. It creates a completely rigid, stable setup that holds those gears exactly where they need to be, no questions asked. And look, this is so much more than just stopping a noise. Getting the preload right is the bedrock of a healthy differential. It literally stops the entire carrier assembly from shifting around. That in turn keeps the ring and pinion gears meshing perfectly. And when they mesh perfectly, the load gets spread evenly across the gear teeth, which prevents crazy wear and tear and makes the whole unit last so much longer. It's a chain reaction of goodness. Okay, so how do you actually set this preload? Well, it's kind of a two-part deal. First, we're going to look at the pinion gear, which uses this really fascinating and kind of famous little part called a crush sleeve. All right, so here are the main players for this job. You've got the pinion gear itself, you've got the two bearings that hold it in place, and then you have this little metal tube sandwiched right between them. That is the collapsible spacer, or as most people call it, the crush sleeve. And trust me, that little guy is the key to this whole operation. So here's the magic. First, you slide that spacer in between the bearings. Then, as you tighten the big pinion nut, it starts to physically crush and shorten that spacer. It's this crushing action that precisely squeezes the two bearings together, and that's what applies the preload. And what's wild is that you're not aiming for a certain tightness on the nut. Nope. The real goal is measuring how much friction, or drag, it takes to spin the pinion gear.
And that target is incredibly sensitive. For a set of used bearings, for example, you're aiming for a rotational drag of just 10 to 15 inch-pounds. And notice I said inch-pounds, not foot-pounds. It's a super delicate measurement of friction that you check with a special torque wrench. And here's the kicker. If you go just a tiny bit too far, you've overcrushed the sleeve, and you have to throw it away and start all over with a brand new one. Talk about precision.
Now, the second part of this job is setting the preload on the carrier bearings. Those are the ones that hold the big ring gear. And the way this is done is, honestly, it's kind of mind-bending. You actually have to physically spread the entire differential case apart.
The secret here is these big threaded adjusters, one on each side of the carrier. By turning these, a mechanic can apply incredibly fine-tuned pressure to the outside of the bearings, pushing them inward. But that's only half the story.
This quote from a mechanic just nails it. You're not just making the bearings tight, you are literally stretching the heavy cast iron differential housing. It's what's called an elastic deformation. The housing is constantly trying to spring back to its original shape, and that spring back force is what creates the constant tension on the bearings. That tension is the preload. It's incredible.
So this is how it's done. First, the adjusters are tightened just enough to take out all the free play between the gears. Then, you tighten them a little bit more, in this case by 2 extra notches on the adjuster. That little extra turn is what actually forces the case to spread apart. The housing is now basically a giant loaded spring, and it's always pushing back against those bearings, holding them in that perfect constant tension.
So as you can see, this has nothing to do with just cranking on a wrench as hard as you can. It's a super delicate balancing act. Precision is everything, and it's all tied up with another really critical adjustment. Okay, let's take a second and clear up two words that get mixed up all the time: preload and backlash. Preload, like we've been saying, is all about the tightness of the bearings. Think of it as a squeeze. Backlash, on the other hand, is the tiny bit of clearance, that little bit of wiggle room, between the teeth of the ring and pinion gears. And you need both of them to be absolutely perfect. And here's where it gets really tricky. The two are completely connected. When you move that carrier from side to set the backlash, you're also changing the pressure, the preload, on the bearings. Setting up a differential is like a dance. You adjust one, then you check the other, back and forth, until both the preload and the backlash are sitting exactly in that perfect sweet spot specified by the manufacturer.
Because getting it wrong is a big problem. If the preload is too loose, you get that gear whine we started with, and you'll destroy your bearings in no time. But if it's too tight, you create a ton of friction and heat. That heat will literally cook the gear oil, which then causes the bearings to fail and seize up completely. With preload, there is absolutely no close enough. It has to be dead on.
So that brings us to the big question, right? After seeing all this, crushing sleeves, spreading cases, is setting preload just a matter of brute force, or is it something more? Is it more of a fine art? You know what it is? It's the science of precision. It takes knowledge, it takes the right tools, and it takes a whole lot of careful attention to detail. This hidden tension, this perfectly applied force, it is the absolute key to making sure your differential runs quietly, reliably, and for a very long time.